It was 3 a.m., the dead of night, when the motion sensor lights blazed to life, flooding my front yard in a harsh white glow. I bolted out of bed, adrenaline spiking, and peered through the window. What I saw stopped me cold. 5 men in black uniforms, sunglasses hiding their eyes, stepped out of a white SUV with no plates, their movements sharp and coordinated. They carried clipboards and flashlights, fanning out like they were about to raid a drug den. One of them raised a megaphone to his lips, his voice slicing through the stillness. "You're under investigation for violating HOA security protocols. Open the door now." For a split second, I thought I'd been yanked back to my days leading federal sting operations, chasing down terrorists across state lines. But this wasn't a cartel hideout. This was my front yard in Everwood Oaks, the quiet suburb I'd chosen for retirement. These weren't real agents. They were HOA goons playing dress-up, sent by someone who clearly didn't know who she was messing with. I'm Hank Mercer, a retired federal agent with 25 years in the FBI, once the head of a special task force on domestic terrorism. I'd faced down real threats, armed militias, bomb plots, you name it, but I'd never seen a neighborhood HOA stage a full-on raid at 3 a.m., complete with uniforms and a megaphone, all to enforce some petty rule. Karen Whitlock, the HOA president, wasn't just sending a message, she was waging war. She thought she could intimidate me with her clipboard cronies, but she just made the biggest mistake of her life. Those men didn't knock on the door of some random retiree. They'd knocked on the door of a man who knew exactly how to dismantle operations like hers. I grabbed my old badge, the one I hadn't touched in years, and felt a familiar fire ignite. Karen hadn't just called for an inspection. She'd pulled me right back to the battlefield I'd left behind, and this time, she was the target. Let me tell you how I ended up here, staring down a fake HOA raid at 3 a.m. Everwood Oaks was sold to me as a suburban paradise, a safe haven with white picket fences, perfectly trimmed lawns, and the sound of kids laughing on quiet afternoons. I'd chosen it after my wife, Ellen, passed away from a long battle with illness 2 years ago. Her death left a hole in my heart, and I knew I couldn't keep living the high-stakes life I'd led for 25 years with the FBI. I retired, hoping to spend my remaining years in peace, tending a small vegetable garden, reading on the porch, watching squirrels bicker over acorns on the roof. It was supposed to be a fresh start, a place where I could heal and just be. I thought I'd found it, until Karen Whitlock showed up with her clipboard and shattered that dream. Karen, the self-appointed HOA president, didn't just enforce rules, she choked the life out of Everwood Oaks with them. She'd never been elected, she'd simply declared herself in charge, writing her own bylaws and ruling like a shadow queen. She banned flags in windows, claiming they disrupted harmony. She inspected the paint color of porch chairs, fining anyone who didn't match her approved palette. Her clipboard was her scepter, and she wielded it with a vengeance, controlling every detail of our lives while the residents stayed silent, too afraid to challenge her. I kept my head down, thinking I could ride out her nonsense. After all, I'd faced down terrorists. I could handle a petty HOA Karen. But then she went too far. One afternoon, my neighbor's grandson Leo, a bright-eyed 8-year-old, was fined for hanging a cartoon tablecloth on their clothesline to dry. Leo's mom, Sarah, showed up at my door, her eyes red from crying. "Hank," she whispered, her voice breaking, "is there a law against joy?" That's when I knew Karen wasn't just a nuisance. She was a power-hungry tyrant, abusing her fake authority to crush the spirit of this neighborhood. I'd spent my career taking down people just like her, and retirement wasn't going to stop me now. Karen thought she could control us all, but she'd just woken up the wrong retired agent. The moment that pushed everything over the edge came on a quiet Thursday afternoon in Everwood Oaks. I was in my garden, pulling weeds, when I heard a commotion down the street. Leo, the 8-year-old grandson of my neighbor Sarah, was sobbing uncontrollably. I stepped out to see what was wrong, and my heart sank. Leo stood behind his mom, clutching her leg, his face streaked with tears as Karen loomed over him, her clipboard raised like a judge's gavel. "You're a community vandal," she barked, pointing at the little boy. All he'd done was scatter some decorative stones around the oak tree in their backyard. a child's attempt at making something pretty. But Karen wasn't having it. She'd called in her HOA security team, a group of men wearing black uniforms with red armbands, looking more like a militia than a neighborhood watch. I watched from across the street as the team descended on Sarah's yard like it was a crime scene. They scooped up every stone, tossing them into a bag as if they were collecting evidence in a felony case, their movements cold and mechanical. Leo's cries grew louder, his small frame trembling as he hid behind his mom, his eyes wide with fear. Sarah tried to protest, but Karen cut her off, her voice sharp. "This is what happens when you don't follow community standards." I couldn't stand by any longer. I'd seen enough. I marched over, my FBI training kicking in, and planted myself between Sarah and the team. "What authority do you have to do this?" I demanded, my voice steady but edged with steel. The team leader turned to me, his expression cold as ice. "We're the Private Resident Protection Force, operating under special authorization," he said, flashing a laminated card that looked like it came from a toy store. No badge number, no agency, just the HOA logo and Karen's name. I didn't even have time to ask for their credentials. They turned on their heels, leaving the yard in disarray, the scene looking like the aftermath of a raid. Leo's sobs echoed in my ears as I stood there, my fists clenched. That's when I knew Karen wasn't just making rules. She'd built her own army. This wasn't about community standards, it was about power, control, and intimidation. She'd turned Everwood Oaks into her personal fiefdom, and I wasn't going to let her terrorize anyone else. Not Leo, not Sarah, not my Lily. Karen had just crossed a line she couldn't uncross. After the incident with Leo, I knew I couldn't sit back any longer. I had to act. I'd spent 25 years with the FBI, hunting down criminals who thought they were above the law, and now I turned those skills on Karen Wetlock in her HOA reign. I played the part of the quiet retiree, watering my garden and waving at neighbors. But behind the scenes, I was in full investigation mode. I started documenting everything. Every HOA officer who patrolled our streets in their black uniforms, every unmarked SUV they drove, every hidden camera Karen had tucked into the bushes to spy on us. I traced license plates that led to dead ends, gathered receipts for a private resident security company that wasn't even registered, and dug into their history. One of them had been sued in another state for property coercion. A perfect piece of the puzzle showing Karen's operation wasn't just local. It was a pattern. I formed a secret group with other residents, calling it Operation Oaklight. There was Sarah, Leo's mom, who brought her fierce determination, Mr. Geller, who'd been terrorized over his yard tools, and a dozen others ready to fight back. We even had a tech-savvy college kid, Ethan, who knew how to hack into systems. He managed to pull footage from the HOA's own security cameras, the ones Karen had installed to monitor community behavior. Every night, we met in my basement, poring over evidence like a task force on a high-stakes case. We collected voicemails of Karen's threats, photos of her handwritten orders, and bank records showing cash payments to her fake security team. Then we struck gold, a video from the HOA office, time-stamped just days after the raid on my house. In it, Karen stood at her desk, barking into her phone. "Read the old man's house. He planted flowers on the walkway! We need to set an example!" We leaked the clip to the neighborhood's online group, and it spread like wildfire. Within hours, it hit TikTok. Karen raids Grandpa for planting flowers, and racked up millions of views. Reddit threads exploded, dissecting every detail of her tyranny, while fake clipboard Karen climbed into Twitter's top 10 trends for 3 straight days. Local news stations started calling, wanting interviews, but Karen didn't back down. She doubled down. Each morning brought a new rule. No filming in the neighborhood, no gatherings after 8 p.m., and my favorite, a ban on negative facial expressions in the mini park. She thought she could tighten her grip, but she was wrong. The tighter she squeezed, the angrier the residents got, their fear turning to fury as they shared their own stories of her abuses online and in whispers at our secret meetings. Operation Oaklight was gaining momentum, and the evidence was airtight. I knew I was just one step away from bringing Karen down for good. Her own cameras, her own words, and her own fake empire were about to bury her. The stage was set for a showdown she'd never see coming. The tension in Everwood Oaks had reached a boiling point after the viral storm of fake clipboard Karen and Operation Oaklight's growing pile of evidence. Karen, desperate to regain control, called an internal hearing at the community center, a kangaroo court to discipline the rebellious residents she blamed for the backlash. I walked in quietly, slipping into the back row, my FBI badge tucked in my pocket, my face a mask of calm. The room was packed with neighbors, some nervous, others defiant, their whispers buzzing like a hive. Karen stood on stage, her clipboard clutched like a shield, her collared shirt crisp as ever. She scanned the crowd, and when her eyes landed on me, a cold, calculated smile spread across her face, a predator sizing up her prey. She stepped down from the stage, walking straight toward me, her heels clicking on the wooden floor. The room fell silent, every head turning as she stopped just a few feet away, her gaze locked on mine. "I know who you are, Hank," she said, her voice low and venomous, dripping with smug satisfaction. "I've been investigating you from the start." She leaned in closer, her smile widening. "I know what time you take your walks. I have copies of your front door camera footage. I've even analyzed the light patterns in your garden every night." Her words hung in the air, chilling the room. This wasn't just an HOA power trip. It was an obsession, a pathology of control that went far beyond petty fines and rules. Karen wasn't playing a game. She was waging a psychological war. And then she dropped the bombshell that made my blood run cold. "I'm running for city council," she said, her voice rising with a twisted pride. "And taking down a former federal agent like you. That's my ticket to the headlines." She turned to the crowd, her arms outstretched like a politician on the campaign trail. "Everwood Oaks will be my proof. I can control chaos!" The room erupted in murmurs, some residents shifting uncomfortably, others exchanging wide-eyed glances. Karen wasn't just trying to rule our neighborhood. She wanted to use it as a stepping stone to real political power. And I was her symbolic enemy, the former FBI agent she'd defeat to prove her strength. She thought she could intimidate me into submission, turn me into her punching bag for the cameras. But Karen had made a fatal mistake. She didn't just underestimate me as someone easy to scare. She underestimated the entire system of justice I'd spent my career defending. I stayed silent, my hands steady in my lap, but inside I was already planning the next move. Operation Oaklight had the evidence, the FBI had the case, and now I had her motive. Karen wanted a war. She was about to get one she'd never recover from. The Everwood Oaks Community Hall was packed to the brim, the air buzzing with tension as residents filled every seat, their whispers a low hum of anticipation. Karen stood on stage, her clipboard in hand, her voice booming through the microphone as she announced her latest scheme, the Everwood Order Preservation Act, a new set of rules to protect the neighborhood with even stricter fines and patrols. She was mid-sentence, basking in her own authority, when the double doors at the back of the hall burst open with a bang that echoed like a gunshot. The crowd turned, gasping, as two real federal agents in dark suits strode in, their badges glinting under the fluorescent lights, flanked by local police. The room fell silent, all eyes on them as they marched straight to the stage, their steps deliberate and unyielding. The lead agent stepped forward, holding up a search warrant like a beacon of justice. "Karen Wells," he declared, his voice sharp and commanding. "You're under investigation for abuse of power, violation of civil rights, and impersonating law enforcement." The crowd erupted in gasps, murmurs rippling through the room like a wave. Karen's face drained of color, her clipboard trembling in her hands as she stumbled back, her confident facade shattering like glass. "This is an internal meeting!" she screamed, her voice cracking with desperation as she clutched the microphone, looking to the crowd for support. But the residents weren't on her side anymore. They were staring at her with a mix of shock and fury, years of her tyranny flashing before their eyes. I stood up from the front row, where I'd been sitting quietly, and walked onto the stage, my FBI badge still in my pocket but my resolve clear as day. I raised a hand, silencing the room, and looked straight at Karen. "You built a team to intimidate people," I said, my voice steady but cutting like a blade. "I built evidence to protect them. That's the only difference here. One side is fake power, and the other is real justice. The crowd roared, their cheers shaking the walls as Karen staggered back, her legs wobbling like a kite caught in a storm, her clipboard slipping to the floor with a pathetic clatter. The agents moved in, cuffing her as she tried to protest, her voice lost in the sea of applause. Karen's private police team was disbanded on the spot, their fake badges confiscated as evidence, and the HOA's operations were suspended immediately by the city. The residents leapt to their feet, their cheers a thunderous wave of relief and triumph, a community finally free from the shadow of her clipboard. Justice had arrived in Everwood Oaks, and Karen's reign was over for good. The aftermath was a quiet victory for Everwood Oaks, a neighborhood finally free from Karen's grip. The morning after her arrest, the old HO Aralas APLY sign, a metal monstrosity that had loomed over the entrance like a warning, was taken down for good. Mr. Jenkins, a 90-year-old veteran who'd once been fined for hanging an American flag on his porch, led the charge. With a steady hand, he used the very screwdriver Karen had forced every household to buy, to meet HOA standards, unscrewing the bolts one by one as neighbors gathered. Clapping and cheering with each turn, the sign crashed to the ground, and the kids ran up, grabbing chalk to scribble smiley faces and hearts over the faded letters. Someone taped a handwritten note to the post. Everwood belongs to the people, not the clipboard. The message was clear: Karen's reign was over, and we weren't going back. Karen packed her bags in silence, her house emptying out over the next few days. No one stopped by to say goodbye, no waves, no farewells. The gate to Everwood Oaks closed behind her as she drove away, but this time, it wasn't to control us, it was to shut her out for good. The neighborhood exhaled, the weight of her tyranny lifting like a morning fog. Kids played in the streets without fear of fines, their laughter echoing where Karen's megaphone once barked orders. Porches bloomed with colorful decorations she'd once banned, and the smell of fresh grass replaced the tension that had lingered for years. Everwood Oaks wasn't just a place to live anymore. It was a community again, one we'd fought for and won. I stood on my porch, watching the sun rise over the treetops, knowing we'd taken back our home, not just for me and Lily, but for every neighbor who'd lived under Karen's shadow. One crisp morning, I took a walk through the park trail in Everwood Oaks. The first time in years I didn't feel eyes watching my every move. The air felt lighter, the streets brighter, as if the neighborhood had finally shaken off Karen's shadow. I spotted Leo across the way, hanging a Pokémon tablecloth on the clothesline, his grin wide as he waved at me. "Uncle Hank, we put the Pokémon sheet back up," he shouted, his voice bubbling with joy. I smiled, waving back, a warmth spreading through my chest. I didn't need my badge, my gun, or my armor anymore. Sometimes, all it takes is the right person, at the right time, saying, no. Karen thought the most dangerous person was the one with a gun, but she was wrong. The real danger was the silence she'd forced on Everwood Oaks, the fear that kept us quiet while she played queen. I'd spent my career chasing enemies across state lines, but I never thought my last fight would be right here, behind the white picket fences of my own neighborhood. I'd stepped away from the battlefield years ago, or so I thought. But sometimes, the enemy isn't out there in the shadows. Sometimes they're standing on your doorstep, clipboard in hand, thinking they can rewrite justice. Everwood Oaks was free now, a place where kids could hang cartoon tablecloths and neighbors could plant flowers without fear. I'd fought for that freedom, not with bullets but with evidence, with truth, and with a community that refused to stay silent any longer. Ever had an HOA Karen try to control your life? Drop your story in the comments. I want to hear how you fought back! If this wild showdown between a retired FBI agent and a power-hungry HOA Karen had you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button and share it with anyone who's ever battled a clipboard dictator. Subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss more epic stories of justice, neighborhood rebellions, and jaw-dropping takedowns that'll leave you cheering. I want to hear your HOA horror stories in the comments. Ever been fined for something as silly as a cartoon tablecloth or a flower bed? Drop your tale below. I might feature it in my next video! Let's keep fighting for freedom together!